I've kind of wanted to see what these Amazon control boxes are all about. I'm going to open it up with you and go through the parts and pieces, and then I'm going to take you through the process of installing it on the boat. Let's dive in. Hey, it's Tom from Tom's Toons. We've done quite a few videos with control boxes, shift throttle boxes, side mounts, binnacle mounts, Mercury, Atwood, Yamaha. I don't think I've covered Honda yet, but we'll get there. This customer went and repowered their boat with a newer, bigger, used motor. They didn't want to spend a fortune, and I've kind of wanted to see what these Amazon control boxes are all about. So that's what we're going to put on this boat. So online, these look identical to OEM or a Mercury, Quicksilver, the same thing, control box, the newer style. What that does mean is that you need generation 2 control cables, which are going to look like this on the control box side. So there's a groove here that's going to work into the control box, and then the fitting on the end to actually be secured in the control box to push and pull for shifting. Your other end is going to look just like the motor side would on a Gen 1 cable. We have a barrel and then our fitting here. So just so you know, with this control box, and it indicates it on Amazon, it indicates that you need Gen 2 cables. And of course, I will put the link. This will be in my affiliate store on Amazon, this exact box, so control box. So I'll make sure to link that here. Let's see what's in here. Probably no coincidence that this comes in a package that looks identical to a Mercury control box package. This bezel piece looks identical. The way that they ship it looks identical. So what we have is that bezel piece here. This will go on the console first. This piece then slides through the bezel into the console. So our shift and throttle is actually the top side style. There's a trim and tilt switch on here. We have a trim tilt harness, and this actually is the same shape and design as the Mercury one, so that'll plug and play. And then our neutral safety harness, and this will splice right in or plug right in to the Mercury ignition harness. And then our last couple pieces here, we've got these brackets that actually will mount on each side of the control box, and then your bolts go through those, or screws, to hold it in place. We have a spacer for vibration. Not really sure what that little knob is, but we'll look at the schematic. Same type of hardware as Mercury, so they have a little self-locking, I'll show you these when we put them on, but these black bolt with self-locking. You can hold that with your hand and it compresses down. Then you got some hardware in there too, and our cover. So the only difference this box versus a OEM Mercury box is when I peel that off on a Mercury, it would say Mercury right there. There's a little plastic piece there. It doesn't actually say anything on this one. So most people, me included, if you took a Mercury decal off and stuff, this looks identical to the Mercury boxes that I've installed, new ones, recently. So let's go see how it's going to fit up on the boat, and I need to pull my new cables through to the helm. I got to remove the old control box. It's just stiff to shift, not ideal, not unsafe, but it's not comfortable to drive. I'm going to get that stuff torn out, and then I'm going to get to installing this. That little black piece, I said I had no idea what it was. It presses right in here, and that's that throttle only. So we push that in, and I can advance only the throttle, and I don't have to shift. That's what that is. As I'm getting ready to run my shift throttle cables, quick hack, I put an S right on there for, this is going to be my shift. So this is the control box side. This is my motor side. There's an S on there as well, just in Sharpie. I don't need to label the throttle cable because, well, if this one's labeled shift, the other one must be throttle. So I'm gonna go ahead and run these under the boat. River's really busy. These are his old shift throttle cables. And so I'm gonna run them through just same path that these went through up to the helm. And on the helm right now, that's the control box on the helm right now. I'm gonna unhook it there and pull everything right out through. So that's where our new control box will be mounted. To get access to some of my electrical, I need to pull this panel off. This is the standard helm from pontoonstuff.com. And inside of here, I have those neutral safety wires. So we'll be splicing into those. They go to the main harness. And then we also have our trim tilt wires that we'll just have to splice in. This is an older style connection, but we have a red, which is power. We have a blue that's up and green that's down. We'll splice those in and make them correspond when we get to that part. Right now, I need to go ahead and make sure that my power is off from the battery, and then I can take off the control box. From the other side, I'll go ahead and just cut my neutral safety wires and my trim tilt wires so I can get ready to use them with the new control box. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut stuff from the control box. It's gonna leave me lots of extra wire, but because I'm just trashing this box, I'm not too concerned with it. It does not want to accelerate very well. It's way harder to move than it should be. So I'm gonna cut my neutral safety wires. Those are those red or yellow with a red stripe. And then my trim tilt, I'm gonna go ahead, snip that up here too. And that's gonna allow me just a little easier time getting my cables out. I'm gonna show you here in a second. These are those Generation 1 cables. I'll get a closer look here. So there's a barrel that holds the sheathing in place, and then the cable end is still an open slot, just like the Generation 2. But this is pretty common. These might be what yours look like. That's not gonna work with the new Mercury control box, nor will it work with this aftermarket box. So no way around it. Got to replace them. I think they're like playing on $100 for a set of new shift throttle cables. That box is out. I'm gonna get these cables pulled down through, run my new cables up through, and then we're gonna get to installing our new control box. But just for fun, this is the new bezel piece. This is gonna have to go here, and it's not gonna line up with the exact holes, and I may need to cut a little bit bigger piece, a little overlap. So I'll probably have to get my Dremel tool up here, widen that hole a little bit, make it a little taller, give it a little cutout on the inside here for the trim tilt harness. But all in all, size of the hole looks pretty good, pretty close, because I got a feeling if you're watching this video, you probably have an old control box that looks like this. Maybe it says Quicksilver on it or Mercury, but you're wanting to get rid of this and get something that looks nicer, newer. Maybe you got a new motor and you want to make it fancy. That's probably why you're watching this video. So let's get rid of this old school common one and let's get to the new stuff that looks a lot nicer. One thing that I make sure to do whenever I install new cables, I'm going to start the control box first, but I'm back by the engine right now because this barrel can be a bugger. If it's too far forward, even where it's at now, this could hit the actual shift mechanism, can hit the barrel, and you might think there's something wrong with your control box, something wrong with the cable, something wrong with the motor, who knows. I like to just go ahead, this is on a threaded rod, and I'm going to just back it all the way until it's to the sheathing here, and that way I don't have to worry about my shift mechanism here. It can only go this far now, so there's a gap. So before it was hitting, and that might interfere with the shift mechanism or throttle mechanism up at the control box. I've done that to both cables. I'm going to go up front now and start getting ready to assemble my control box. So if you were starting from scratch on this same console, maybe it's a large console or the newest console from pontoonstuff.com, I would take this as my template because I know that this box is going to fit through it when I install it. There's a little bit of room, there's a little bit of play there, but I would usually take this and use this as a stencil right on the console. I would draw a line on the inside all the way around, including this little cutout here. And that would allow me to then just slide everything right in. I can pretty much line up this one hole at the top here. I'm gonna have to drill another hole here, and then I am gonna have to open this up just a little bit to make space. But otherwise, I think if I just trace this in here, so you can see what I need to cut additionally there with my line. I'm gonna cut just on the inside of that line, play it safe. That'll leave room for me to still get my screws or bolts through there and access to what I need. This is my best friend. This is a Dremel tool with a multi-cutting bit on the end. This gets through this rotomolded plastic really well. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this, and then we'll be ready to fit everything in. There you go. So that's cut. I'm not gonna screw this in yet, but I do need to make sure that my cables, I'm gonna pull my shift throttle cables up through here. They need to go through this. Otherwise, I'm gonna hook it all up and have to undo everything just to get my cables back in. So I gave myself some slack there. I'm gonna, again, set that right on there. Just gonna rest. Now, I have my S for shift, my non-label, that's my throttle. I'm gonna get my control box ready. And what that looks like is just undoing, there's 5 screws. That'll remove this back panel and give me access. But before I hook anything up, I need to make sure what my motor does for shift and throttle, whether it's a push or a pull, and make sure that it pulls into forward to shift and forward, pushes to neutral, and then pushes for reverse. So here's why I need to check with the motor first, because as you see, the first thing to move is going to be the shift mechanism. So when I move the control handle, I'm shifting it into what I'm going to say is forward. I shift, and as you can see, this one pulls. It would pull the cable. This one pushes. Typically on this motor, it's going to be a pull into forward, so I would use this post for my shift, and then throttle. Once I get past the shift, my throttle is the next to move. And you can see this one's pulling to open the throttle, and this one's pushing. So depending on which style your motor is, that's where you're gonna hook up your shift and throttle cables. Let's go look at the motor to check on that. My shift mechanism is here. That will pull to go into forward. So right now I'm in forward. Prop won't spin. And then that's neutral. And then reverse, I have to turn the prop while you shift. So it pushes into reverse again, prop stuck. So that will plan on being our pulling into forward, remember that. And this is our throttle arm here. So this advances the throttle. That's where my throttle cable will hook to. So what I need to make sure to note is that it's going to pull to advance the throttle. So we have a pull to shift to forward, pull to advance the throttle. That's how we check it. If it was configured differently, this post might push to advance the throttle on the carburetors and the motor. So keep that in mind. That's how this works. We need pull for throttle, pull for forward. Let's go back up to the console and put our cables in. For the record, this is a 2002 50 ELPTO. It's a 2-stroke, oil injected. Like I mentioned, the customer bought this, brought it to me for me to install, and it's a rebuilt power head, so a little more power than he had, and a fresh engine. His was starting to give him some trouble. So one more time, shift, pulling to shift. So let's just go ahead. Mark that with an S for shift. Throttle, I need it to pull for forward. Look at that. This one is going to pull the cable in the sheathing to advance the throttle. So both of my cables in this case will run through this position. This wire just feeds through the bottom hole there. That's for that neutral safety. We'll get there eventually. Let's go ahead. The shift cable is going to go on first because that's the bottom post. So we'll run that in. What I'm going to do with this, we have this groove here. That's going to slide right into the groove in the control box. So what that does is that locks the sheathing in place so that this part of the mechanism can push and pull to actually shift the motor. I'm going to get it into position here. It can only be in one position. There's no adjustment on the control box side. That's important to remember. All of our adjustment is on the engine side, the outboard side. So I get that cable in. I'm going to go ahead and put the bolt in to hold this in place. So I did just take a quick look at the instruction manual. My guess is it's a photocopy of the Mercury's, but there are some little differences. Biggest one that I just noticed is that normally on a Merc box, you're going to get a pretty beefy hex head screw to hold your cable onto the place. And those usually, when they come from Mercury, they have Loctite on them. Actually, in the owner's manual or the instructions manual for this control box, it tells me to put Loctite on these. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And then before I put my throttle cable on, there's a gap here. I'm gonna take this little white plastic. Here's another difference. In Mercury, these are black plastic, but same part. And this will slide down into that space that holds the cable sheathing, and that gets the correct spacing between my cables. You get some extra spacers with your control box because depending on how it's rigged for push pull throttle, that may be a little bit different. So I just go ahead and stack those in here on the other side that's wide open, and that'll keep the critters out. I've got my throttle cable now in position, so I'm gonna get a little Loctite on the machine screw, and then I'll get that tightened in. T-shirts are rags, right? It's kind of like how everything's a hammer, at least it is in this shop. So everything's a rag, it's cloth. They give you specs for torquing these. With the Loctite in there, I'm gonna get them nice and snug because there's a lot of vibration on the pontoon boat. We don't need these coming loose. I've got my shift throttle cables both hooked up here. What I need to do, if I wanted to test it, I can go ahead and shift into forward, give it some throttle. That is nice and smooth. Reverse, we're good. Notice while I'm doing that, I'm holding these down, otherwise they're gonna pop out and go crazy. I am ready. I double check. My cables are through my bezel. I gotta put that black cover back on top because that is in part what holds my cables into this groove so that the shift and throttle mechanisms work. We got a little line up at the top. There's a little tab on there. That's gonna fit into the top first, and then everything can set into place. And I always start with this bottom screw first. With that in place, I'll go ahead, go through, get all the rest of my screws in. I like to hand tighten stuff. I like to feel that last little twist before I'm done so I know everything's in, but I can use my impact at least to get them started. There's one that's a little different, it's shorter and a wider head than the others. That one goes right in this middle spot here. With those screws in, we're not going anywhere with our cables. So let's go ahead and drop this down in. Before I push my shift throttle box through, I need to install these brackets. They go on each side of the control box. It doesn't matter which side. We want to make sure that that trim tilt wire is pinned down inside. There's room for it so it can move and freely. And then there are our longer bolts that came with these. I'm going to use a washer on the Phillips head side as it's smaller. Go ahead and run those down through. And this allows for some adjustment of the height and the angle of your control box too. We've got nylock nuts for the other side. What I like to do here is get it snug, but to where there's still a little bit of movement. That way I can adjust if need be, but we want to make sure we get it most of the way tight, just because it's easy to work with out here, not as easy once it's mounted on. So as I slide this in, I'm going to make sure that neutral safety wire is through, make sure my trim tilt wires go through. Then I can push everything down into the console. And the holes with these brackets are going to correspond to the holes in our bezel piece, or our black cover piece there. And I've got a 3/16 inch bit. I'm going to drill a hole, and then I can run. This is a pretty unique mechanism, the way that they do this. First time I saw it, I wasn't sure what I was even looking at. But what Mercury's done is given us kind of a bit of a spring mechanism, or a locking mechanism, where this bolt goes in, it's gonna squish the rubber piece, and that's gonna hold everything in place. If you had mounting screws, just stainless screws, this one did, you could reuse those, they'd be completely fine, but we're gonna go ahead and use this. And it's nice to work when you're by yourself, because once you get it started, it's gonna snug down. You don't have to keep a hand with a wrench on the other side, and they get really snug. Oh, light went off. What I need to do is drill my 3/16 hole, get this first one in place, then I can move along, get everything centered the way I want it, and then get them all in. Before I tighten all this, there is a place on the bottom of your control box. We do have a throttle tension. It's in the owner's manual. And then you could secure your cable for your trim tilt. They show in the description, they show a place to mount a zip tie. So there is a plastic piece that, before we get ahead of ourselves here, it will give me the chance to give some slack to my trim and tilt harness. And this will give me a spot to run a zip tie. I'll show you what it looks like. The little white clip goes in here, right here, and then I can zip tie my trim tilt harness with a little bit of slack. So I'm just going to add a little loop here, and then that way, as I shift each direction, I can make sure that I leave enough slack in that system, so in this full throttle position forward, there's enough slack that my trim tilt harness isn't going to get pulled on, isn't going to get pulled and ruined, or ruin the switch, or get unplugged somehow. So we can put a zip tie in here just to hold that in place, so that nothing can get pulled from below or anywhere else. I've got that fit up with a little bit of slack, so now we can drop that back in. And that'll hold in place at 3/16 with the plastic. There's a little bit of a grab there anyway. So what I'm going to do is get this lined up with the bezel in those holes, and I'm going to drill my other 3 holes so I can get all of my machine screws in through. Good chance you're going to need to shift to free up some space here so you can get at what you need to do those holes. But again, we're going through the metal bracket holes into the console. I haven't tightened these bolts yet. I'm going to get everything situated. That'll be the last thing I do before I put the cover on. So I need to go ahead, I'm going to get one arm on the inside, one arm tightening from this side, and get all these in position and tight so that the shift throttle box can move. Put those in place. This cover is going to come on. You just want to make sure that there's enough room. So like right now, you know, the back should kind of click into place, and then you tighten the front. But as I'm pushing on this, I'm not able to quite close the front. So what I need to do is look at my control box and make sure that I'm pushed down in here properly to where I can get that cover on. So I loosened those. I made sure everything was level because it was kind of in there kittywampus just slightly. But that is super smooth shifting. The one complaint that I've heard, I talked to a friend who's a marine mechanic down the road, and he worked on an Evinrude one that was off of Amazon, and that neutral people can sometimes have a hard time finding. So that might be, you know, the one issue is that it's just kind of a fly in and out. I don't know what the proper term is. Somebody comment that below. But you can fly in and out of neutral. without a detent. So just something to keep in mind. Finding neutral for some people is a challenge, but it's not too bad. It kind of goes right into neutral. I can feel it definitely shift into reverse, definitely click into forward. So pretty happy there, I think. So now that cover piece, now that I loosened, leveled, and pushed it in, should be able to slide right into position here. We've got one more little stainless screw. I just had to crawl around on the floor and find it. Don't lose that. That's going to go into the front to secure the front of the box. Before I put the cover on, I have a spacer. It's got a little groove, it lines right up. And that's just going to reduce vibration and make the fit a little more snug. I've noticed even on installing some of the newer Mercury boxes, getting everything to line up just right. We're off slightly here, off slightly on the outside is not the easiest task. Even on an OEM one, the set screw doesn't actually thread in to a fitting or anything. It just goes into a little hole, and with the tension on everything, it's gonna hold in position there. So, I mean, not the most perfect fit in terms of this outside edge. And if that bothers you, you could remove that vibration piece, and it's not going to be the end of the world if that's missing. If that gives you a better fit up, as it will in this case, then we can go without it if we need to. The box is all installed. I'll say one thing, this lineup, the way everything fits up here, and the Merc boxes, factory boxes, aren't perfect either, but it's a little bit cattywampus, nothing major. Just the way you got a little gap here, not gonna hurt anything at all, but that's on. Full disclosure, I went to install everything on the motor, and the cables were about 6 inches short. So not sure what happened there, because I got the same length as the Gen 1s, but they didn't work, so went to the store, got longer cables. Now we're ready to hook up the motor. It happens to everybody. The other thing I did is I did replace, I didn't like how much that nut moved inside here, so I went ahead and just put stainless machine screws with nylock nuts on the back with a washer for the 4 bolts holding the controls in. Now I'm confident that it's not going anywhere at all. So that's one thing I'll say on this Amazon control, is that those did not hold up like the ones that come with the Mercury box. Just my opinion. I made sure it's not going anywhere. We are all done up top. Great shift and throttle, again neutral. I think it will improve when it clicks into neutral when we get the motor set up. We're done up here. We gotta hook up our trim tilt wires and our neutral safety wires, and then we can go back to the engine. So I'm sitting here editing the video and realized that somehow I either lost or didn't record where I spliced the wires under the console back together to fit with the new control box. So when you do that, it's simply going to be putting a heat shrink butt splice, connecting your yellow with a red stripe. There's 2 of those wires from the control box. 2 should be from your ignition harness. For those neutral safety wires, you don't necessarily have to connect them in any order, as long as the 2 coming from your ignition harness are connected or spliced into the 2 coming from the control box. And then you also have that trim and tilt, which was a red, that's power, and then a blue and a green wire. All you need to do is reconnect all of those color-coded wires to each other, corresponding color, and you'll be just fine. So sorry, I somehow lost that video, but I think you'll be okay, because if you cut them and took them apart, you're gonna remember what it looked like from your old control box. Just replicate that when you're putting this new box in. So we're back on the motor side, and I've run my ignition harness. It's that 8-pin, and then we do have the pigtails for trim and tilt. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook this up. It's on this big plug. So this is the male side from the control side, or the console side. That's just gonna plug right in here. Clips into this mechanism, helps keep it from ever coming apart. And then we'll connect our blue to blue. There's these wires run back. 2 greens come together. So we'll go green to green, blue to blue. You may, if you're just replacing your control box and not your ignition, or your engine, you may not have to do any of this. That might just be, it might be the easy part for you. I'm gonna route this through out of the way, and then we'll get to our shift throttle cables on the other side over here. This is typically how it is on most Mercs. You're gonna have, on one side you'll have your electrical, and then the other side you'll have your actual shift throttle cables. We've got our ignition harness in and run. We're to the final part, which is getting our shift throttle cables. This is where this is really handy. This cable I labeled with an S for shift. That's got to go in first because our shift mechanism down here is lower than the throttle arm. So what's going to happen is these barrels are adjustable. Now I'm going to show you how I adjust it in a second. But when they're in position, my shift cable will be on the bottom, throttle on top. They will go into this little guy, a little sleeve, and that holds them in place together. And then that will insert down into this part here, which will lock shut with that, and that'll hold our cable sheathing in place so that the cable end can move. My control box I've verified is in neutral, super important. Make sure it's in neutral when you're hooking these up. So I'm going to take my shift cable first, and I'm just, without this little sheathing or housing, I'm going to slide that cable in to where it will eventually lock here. So that way I have a little bit of play, but not much. And I need to get my shift cable end to fit on my motors in neutral. I verified that as well. My prop can spin freely. I need to get this cable end onto this post without tension. So right now I kind of have to force it on there just a little bit. So I want to actually add a little bit of slack. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little length here by moving this barrel a couple rotations. It's a fine thread, so it takes a couple spins to make a difference. And now I'm on that, and I'm a lot more centered. I'm actually going to give it one more spin here, and I like where that's at now. So I got a little bit of slack in the system. That's going to be a good thing when we go to actually shift. So with this, all I need to do is spin this little locking mechanism. It's plastic, so be gentle with that. But I just clip that into place, and now my shift cable is in position. So I can drop that into this rubber grommet in the front. And then we have to put our throttle cable on next. So I need to get that adjusted. Then I'll go back and I'll make sure that these are in that housing correctly. So for the throttle, same thing. I'm gonna drop it into this catch here, and this one actually has 3/8. I've got a 10 mil socket that'll work just fine. 10 millimeter, just a little nylock nut with a washer. Get those out of there, and the cable end will fit right onto that throttle arm. And as you can see now, it's too long extended, so what I need to do is shorten this distance here. So what I'm going to do is rotate that barrel the opposite way I did the shift cable, and that's going to shorten everything up. And what I like to do when this is in position, so I went a little too far, and you can see that if this were centered in here, this right here should be resting dead against that aluminum block. So I went a little too much. I need it to be here. I actually even like it to where my cable is kind of pushing the throttle into the bottomed out position. So that looks a lot better to me. I'm going to be pushing that into position now so that my bottom idle position is proper. So this will keep it from being accelerated in neutral or at bottom throttle. So then we'll put our washer and nylock nut back on.
Maybe.
If I don't lose it in the bottom of the motor. So with both cables on, and there's a chance I'm gonna go run this, and there's a good chance that I might have to get underneath here again and adjust it based on when I shift. Especially, I haven't used this shift mechanism before, but if you get any clicking between gears or it's not shifting smooth, there's a chance I might need to come and adjust the shift cable. If the idle seems really high for some reason, I might need to adjust the throttle cable and where it's fit. But usually, if I have some slack in the shift and I have my throttle bottomed out, I'm gonna be in a good spot. So what I have to do before I can house these permanently is I need to put that little fitting back on. So shift cable on the bottom, throttle on top. That's gonna drop into that groove, and my cables are gonna go down into that grommet in front. That's in position. Now I swing this across. Another plastic piece. That locks everything down and in so those can't move. And we are ready to put the hood back on. That'll close that grommet up. What I'm gonna do real quick is hop up in the boat, and I'm gonna have wonderful Miss Corey spin the propeller. We're just gonna make sure that it shifts. Don't try to jam it and dry shift. You need to move that propeller while you shift. That's just how that works, so you don't ruin something. I'll be right back. She's just gonna spin it with her foot here. So with everything good at the engine, here's one thing I'll make note of that the Mercury box does not do, and that's all this extra play. The brand new Mercury box that just came out has an actual detent underneath here that you have to squeeze in order to get out of neutral. This one is kind of that, I forget what they call it, but a flyby. But there's a lot of play in here, and there's no way that I could adjust that out. There's definitely, when I shift, it's a distinct into forward, which is a good thing. But see, we got a little bit of play. Back to neutral is pretty easy. And then reverse, it's not spinning yet, but we got a bit of play here. And that was the one thing I talked to a buddy of mine with that Evinrude box that he installed from Amazon, was that there was some play. So I think it's just gonna take a little getting used to, but the good news is when it comes back to neutral, it's obvious. I mean, we're really locked in here. And when I shift into forward, it's a little bit of work. I don't think that's a bad thing, because then we're gonna know we're going into forward. So that is the one thing I'll make mention there initially before we even run it, that this definitely has got a little bit of play in there. I'm gonna go outside and start this thing up. We're outside ready for a test run. Trim and tilt both work. The neutral safety works. So we tested that by shifting into forward, turning the key. Let's see how she starts. So with these Mercs, I can just bump the key in, and that'll keep priming, or basically choking, pushing fuel to the motor. And then if I want to, I could then push this button and advance the throttle. So now I can rev it up just a little bit. Nice and easy, really pretty easy into forward. Give it a little throttle. Back to neutral, reverse. Much better than his old box. Besides this little bit of play here, really not too bad. For reverse, neutral is pretty easy to find when you click it in. Forward's easy to find. So really pretty happy with that. Thank you so much for watching this video. Yeah, I'm always gonna preach, go buy the OEM or the Mercury brand control box, but I get it. If you're a DIY guy, you wanna save some money, or DIY gal, these are an alternative. Is it gonna last as long? I don't know yet. All in all, pretty happy with how it shifts, throttles, and functions. So it's a consideration, something to try. If you want to save some money, do it yourself. Simple install if you follow this video. I hope that this helps. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel, share these videos, share them with your boating community. Let them know that we are out there, and help our channel grow. We really appreciate it. And I do have an affiliate store on Amazon, stuff like this. If I can get it from pontoonstuff.com, I'm always going to get it there, because I know it's great quality and I know they have a great guarantee and customer service. Stuff like this, if I got to get it from Amazon, I do add those into my affiliate store. So I have an affiliate shop. I'll put that link in the description of this video, so you can click over to find this control box and some of the other components that I use that I get from Amazon, because quite frankly, it's the only place I can find to source them. Thanks for watching.